Welcome, everyone, to the next edition of Unscripted and Unstoppable. I am Laureen Quick, your host, and I am so glad you are here. This month, we are exploring the concept, the idea of integration, not as something that we force, but as something that begins to settle when we stop trying to rush past what we have lived through. Because not everything that changes in our lives needs to be solved. Some things just need to be felt, understood, and integrated before they begin to make sense. And one of the places that we often lose that connection is with our own energy. In my work, I often will talk about what I call the four arcs of reorientation. They are not steps or stages that progress in any kind of linear order, but they're different terrains, I would say, that we find ourselves standing in at different points, different times in our life. Sometimes we're in a descent where what used to work just no longer works and everything feels discombobulated. And our energy often will feel low and inconsistent and even hard to access. Sometimes we might be in a place of shedding where we are letting go of roles, we're letting go of all those expectations, and sometimes even our own identities. And that can lead to feelings and energy levels of fatigue and resistance and even confusion. And often in both of those spaces, we will misinterpret what is happening. We think something is wrong with us. We think we need more discipline. We think we need more motivation. We think maybe we need to go to the doctor. We need to put in more effort to make things happen and work. But what if that isn't the case? What if what we're experiencing actually is information? Information coming to us, not something that we want to override, not something we want to try to control, but rather we want to listen to. When we begin to move into the terrain of reclaiming, we often shift our perspective. We start to notice our energy differently. We begin to recognize what extends and what expands around us, what contracts, what drains us, and also what restores us. And from there, something becomes possible, not through force, but through awareness. That awareness over time is what leads us towards what I call radiance, a place where our energy, our choices, and our lives are all more aligned with each other, and we feel whole and content and maybe even happy. Today's conversation sits right at that place. It is about understanding energy not as something we have to manage or control or push through, but as something that is constantly communicating with us. I am joined today by Tracy Nicholas, an energy practitioner and an author whose work focuses on helping people understand and work with their own energetic patterns in a grounded, in a very practical way. She brings to our conversation a unique perspective, blending an understanding of human frequency, the impact of our environment, and the role of awareness in how we are able to experience energy day to day. If you have ever been or have been feeling tired or stretched, or like your energy just is not what it used to be, this is a conversation that may make a difference in how you understand what's going on with you, not as a problem to fix, but rather as a way of listening, a signal that we should be listening to learn more about ourselves and our evolution. Tracy, welcome. I am just going to jump right in after all that and ask my first question. Many people hear the word energy and they assume that it's an abstract or it's a mystical thing. How do you explain human energy in a way that people can understand it?
Well, I think that, well, first of all, thank you for having me here. I'm really excited to be here and have this conversation with you. So I think when we're talking about energy, people feel like it's something that they sort of choose to do or not do. But when we want to really understand it, we have to look to the fact that our bodies are basically run by electrical impulses, right? We know that there is an electromagnetic field on the Earth, on all planets, and we also run through electricity. And it's not only, whether or not we're having like, high energy. That's what runs our thoughts and our feelings and every movement that we make. And so when we start to think about that electricity moving through our bodies, there are elements in our bodies like sodium and potassium, right? And they contain specific charges, and those are called ions. And almost every ion in our body, every cell in our body uses ions to generate electricity. And that's how we function, and that's how our bodies work. And if and then what happens is the atoms send the electrical charges from one atom to the next. And those pathways are how our bodies get information on how to run. And so that energy that we have is being generated by how we treat our bodies, how we, if we're getting proper rest, if we're eating the right kinds of foods and we're getting the right nutrients in. And so that's how the body generates electricity. And then those pathways, if those are compromised in some way, that will bring illness, right? If you get the wrong electrical signals to your heart, you'll have heart failure, right? So it's really important to understand that as we're, talking about taking care of our bodies, that definitely affects our energy because it affects our electrical pathways and how they work and how they fire.
So it's not this is part of our physical being, the
Mhm.
energy that we have,
Yeah.
and it is influenced in significant ways by the foods that we eat.
Absolutely, it
Yeah.
is. Yeah, I mean, if you're not getting the right nutrients, then it's not there. You don't have the nutrients that power the ions to create the electrical impulses. And so, if you're eating a lot of junk food, you're going to feel a lower energy because you don't have the right nutrients in your body.
Oh, good. So, and then of course, we mentally react to that in our minds, and our thoughts are not necessarily positive when we feel like we are low energy or in a state of fatigue. So, I mean, I'm guessing, right? It's not the mind doesn't come first, it's the body that comes first. And then the
Right.
mind interprets and tells a story around how am I feeling today and why am I feeling this? Is that accurate or not
Yeah,
not
I mean,
not
yeah,
complete?
it's in part that is accurate. It definitely like I said, the electrical impulses also are how we think. We can't have thoughts without those electrical impulses.
Okay.
So it'll definitely affect our thinking pattern if we are, again, not, treating our bodies right.
Okay. So it becomes really critical that we pay attention to how we are fueling our system.
Right.
And rest, and I would assume too. Rest would
Yeah,
be an important part of that.
yeah, resting is definitely an important part of that. But like also we have to pay attention to the toxins that we're exposed to because, certain toxins can interrupt those pathways as well.
Okay. So this is a lot more complex than just eating right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, good. Well, that's good because we're going to delve further and further into this until we at least have a beginner's understanding of ourselves as energetic fields.
Hmm.
When we talked earlier, you mentioned that humans have I think you called it a vibrational frequency range.
Hmm.
Can you tell us more about what that is?
So a lot of times when, people are talking about energy, they're like, raise your vibration. And it all sounds like really woo-woo. it's actually a real physical thing that we have. And so vibrations are essentially oscillations that occur around some sort of equilibrium point, if you will. And
Okay.
so they can happen in different mediums, air, water, in a branch of a tree, right? And in people. And so examples of this would be like the wind, or when you like feel that thunder, when thunder, happens. Raindrops falling on the ground cause oscillations. So vibrations are happening all around us, and we can even, cause them, right? We can throw a rock into a pond. Um, but the vibrations that happen within us happen again at a cellular level, and the atoms are, oscillating around. And so it gives the human body and all animals and all plants gives them a certain vibration based on, how fast those atoms are oscillating within the molecules. And so when we look at it, there is a very specific range in which the human body should be vibrating. And it's somewhat debated, but generally in the range of 5 to 20 hertz.
Okay.
And we can measure that, and that's a measurement we use. And so what happens is when people are like, raise your vibration, and they're doing all the things, right? They're working out really hard. They're, jumping around and making noise, or they're dancing, or whatever it is that they're like, I want to, raise up. That's great within a certain range, right? And so and it's between 5 and 20 hertz, more or less. And
Okay.
so when you get up in the higher range, that's great for things like, I want to go out dancing, or I'm gonna, get into some very physical yard work or whatever. But you don't want to always be at that range because, as we said earlier, sometimes you want to rest, and sometimes, it's time to sleep. So what happens when we're in the middle of the range, that's when we're at, good health, right? And they say that like 6, 7, 8 is like a really ideal range to be in for much of the time, for much of your day to have good energy. But when you start to get above that range, you start to get things like anxiety, insomnia, those kinds of conditions. Now, if you get too low and you start to drop below it, you can, get sick. And I mean, if you get too low, you die. But you start to get things like depression, exhaustion, those kinds of things. So it's really important to understand that vibration in our bodies is a real thing, and it affects how our energy levels are.
Okay. So let me repeat back some of that so I make sure I understand. So we typically as human beings go between 5 and 25?
5 and 20.
5 and 20. Okay. And 6 or 7 is kind of a norm, a healthy range?
That's in the healthiest part of the range for like day-to-day kind of life.
Living. Okay. And then it's perfectly natural to have fluctuations in your vibrational field based
Absolutely.
on what's going on in your life. So
Yep.
you're not going to wake up every day and be a 10,
Right.
but you might have a 10 experience. But if you stayed at a 10, you might burn out, so to speak, right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
You kind of fry your system.
Hmm.
So you can, okay, so it's about finding this balance then with your energy around not being too low, which would, of course, ultimately could lead to death, if not illness. But
Hmm.
then don't be too high because at the same time, that high level on a regular basis is too much for our system.
Hmm.
Okay, good. So then the next logical question would be, how do we how do we manage that? How do we learn to put ourselves in the zone that's optimal for us?
Hmm. Well, one of the problems that we have is most of us spend a lot of time, most of our time in front of electronics, right?
Okay.
Or at least, with Wi-Fi around, right? And so the problem with electronics is that's a much higher vibration. And so what happens with our vibration is we resonate with what is around us, right? It's
Mm.
like, plucking a guitar string and the strings next to them start to sort of vibrate at that at a frequency that, is very similar. And so what happens when we're around electronics all the time is it starts to pull our vibrational level up, right? And that's one of the things that we're not really conscious of, but one of the reasons why a lot of people have a lot of anxiety and have, insomnia and those kinds of things, because we're so exposed to it all the time that that's pulling us higher in the range. Now, what some things that we can do, what we know is that when you go out into nature, plants and trees and even the earth itself has a lower vibrational frequency than we do. And so all those tree huggers were right all those years ago. Getting out and, being around plants, being in the forest is genuinely calming because it's lowering your vibrational frequency. And there are practices that we can do as well that help us do that. People talk about meditation and, they get crazy about it and they're like, oh, you have to meditate. And some people are like, well, I can't. Like, my brain is going. I can't do it. But there are lots of different ways to meditate. And it's not necessarily just having a completely blank mind, because that's not really, I don't believe that's really possible, right? It's about letting go of thoughts if they come to you and not having to like hold on to them and process them and just being like, okay, that was a thought, right? But you can also do things like meditate while you're walking,
Mhm.
right? Or meditate while you're doing chores. And it's a matter of connection and connecting to what's around you. So that's one of the ways that you can, or two of the ways that you can lower that frequency, and if you can't get out into nature, it can you have a house plant? Can you have a pet? Like, that's one of the things when they talk about cats, who obviously we know when they're vibrating because they're purring, right? They're
Mhm.
vibrating all the time, but when they purr, that particular vibrational frequency is healing to the human body. And so when you have a pet, then you're a cat, then you're getting that benefit if they're laying up against you and purring. And it's, and if you're a dog person, I love dog people. Um, going out and walking, yeah, going out and walking is also, because that kind of cardiovascular exercise, again, that keeps the energy flowing at a good rate. You're not straining yourself too hard, but you're keeping the electricity flowing.
So a nice gentle walk with your dog is very calming. Yes. Yeah.
Not my dogs, they were crazy, but
No, mine is that's mine. It's my one point of sanity every day when we go to our park and we walk together. It's
yeah.
very calming. And I'll go twice if I'm feeling troubled or frustrated or high at a high state of irritation and anxiety or whatever that might be. But good. So it's we are influenced by the environment we have.
Yes.
I would imagine, and tell me if this is true, a beautiful environment would be more calming than a chaotic one. Is that
Yeah, I think that what happens is when we start to get a lot of like visual pollution and even a
Mhm.
lot of like, auditory pollution, that is distracting to our brains.
Okay.
And so we're in part trying to process that. And when we're trying to process like everything, it's exhausting to our brains, right? We're using up a lot of our brain energy. And then we can have something that is called attention deficit. So when we're talking about attention deficit, what happens is if we're processing one thing and we
Mhm.
don't stop and take a break by doing something physical or walking away or doing something different, when we start on the next thing, then we're still processing, oh, I was doing some research and now I'm going to get on to writing the next chapter of my book. But then you're thinking, did I do all the research I needed? And so you're still processing through that if you try and jump from one thing to the next. And so when you have a lot of visual pollution around you, you're always processing. And so it makes it harder to focus and it's very tiring.
Okay. So far I've heard several things we could do. One is we eat well. So
Hmm.
we find the foods that are healthy for us, not junk food, for example. Secondly, we can, well, we'll keep our homes free of clutter, free of distraction. It doesn't have to be gold everywhere, right?
Right.
It just is a place that's calming to us and not full of distractions and reminders about all this other stuff that would cause us to go down a rabbit hole,
Hmm.
mentally. We can get outside and spend time in nature that would allow us to calm down. We could also limit our exposure to technology. So we're
Yes.
not, if possible, not sitting in front of a computer all day long or in front of a television and a computer and a radio and, whatever else is going on. But learn to create more pockets of time that are just quiet and
Yes.
no electricity, no electronics around us. I mean, those
Yes.
are a lot of really great choices and options that we have for creating our lives. And that creates a calmness in us that brings us
Absolutely.
to a healthy megahertz, right? Is what we were saying. Okay,
Hmm.
good. All right. So, all of this, I mean, all of these are things I'm doing, but maybe not as conscious as I could be. And certainly the clutter could go for me. I have a little bit too much sometimes in my life, but I'm working on that, and I'm going to work harder on it now as we talk some more. If you think about women my age, women who are in their 50s, 60s, 70s, why do you think, or do you think that it's a very important time for women like myself to start paying attention to their energy as we get older?
Well, I think that, we have to face the reality that our bodies are not what they used to be. And I think that if we are sort of at a low energy level, then we're doing less of taking care of our bodies. We're not working out maybe as much. We're not walking as much. And I think that part of what is important about what you just said about being intentional about doing it, and I'm going to take a little bit of a left turn here, but I'll get back to this point.
Yeah.
Um, I'm really fascinated by the placebo effect because the placebo effect, everybody knows, you take a sugar pill, something that's inert, and then your brain sort of says, oh, I took medicine to make me better, and your brain starts to heal your body, right? We know
Mhm.
that that is a proven phenomenon. The really interesting thing about the placebo effect, though, is that it works even if the person taking the pill knows it is a placebo. Now, it's not quite as effective, but it still works, which says to me that ritual is really, really an important tool, even a ritual as small as taking a pill, because your brain has it programmed in like, oh, taking a pill means that I'm going to get better. And so when you start to mindfully do it, it becomes a little more ritualistic in our lives. And you sort of move into this place of, I am going to take my dog to the park so I can be in nature. I can get, my steps in. I can get my electricity moving, and then and I'll feel better. And so your brain starts to tell itself a story, right? And stories are very interesting. We tell stories about things that are important to us. And so
Yeah.
if you make sure that you're telling a story about, hey, this will make me feel better, then it is in essence more effective. And then your brain just sort of processes that and then it believes it. And it just it's a snowball effect.
Wow. So To me, that is amazing if you think about that, because it's just in the telling of the story,
Yep.
right? And it becomes truth in our mind, and that truth enables our body to respond accordingly.
Yeah, and stories are amazing to me because we learn a lot from stories. And when we learn something from a story, right, we can forget the story ever existed, right?
Mhm.
But we still keep that lesson. And then those become our beliefs. And so I'm always examining my stories. You can be telling yourself, like, oh, I'm not a athletic person. And so then you believe that, right? And you're
Mhm.
like, oh, I can't run a half marathon. I can't do this. I can't do that. Whereas if you were saying, like, I can get better at doing something that's good for me physically, then that's the story you believe. And you say, okay, then I'm going to try because I know I have to practice to get better.
So we tell ourselves lots of stories about getting older,
Yes,
and they're not necessarily positive.
exactly.
We tell ourselves it's inevitable that these things
Yes.
will happen.
Yep.
And then we accept it. And sure enough, what do you know? They do happen, right?
Exactly. Exactly.
And so as we're evolving and shifting our identities, which is one of the major things we do when we're in our 50s and 60s and 70s, we are recreating ourselves in many ways. We really want to pay attention to the stories we tell about women getting older
Yes.
and make sure that those stories are the ones we want to embrace in our life versus suffer through because somebody else told that story and
Yes.
I believed it. Yeah.
Exactly right.
Wow.
And you see women and men who are older, who are, they take up weightlifting, right? And they get all jacked and stuff. So it's not like those things are impossible. I've got my dumbbells sitting right here in front of me, and I lift mostly every day. I try to anyway. But I'm thinking to myself, okay, I'm getting into my 60s now, and I don't want to be that person who needs a walker. I want to be that grandma who's going to the gym.
Yep. I want to be that grandma who's 83 years old and she's still traveling the world.
Exactly right.
And
And
those are
and
the
that's the
stories I try to tell. Yeah.
right. And if we limit ourselves to, well, my body's going to break down, then you're not traveling the world. You're scared to step into the bathtub.
Yes. And the thing is, whether we are intentionally telling a story or we're not, we're going to tell a story.
Exactly right.
It's about whose story are we going to tell? The story that mainstream media, the mainstream the culture is feeding us about what it means to get older, or is it a story we choose because it empowers us and expands the experience we have on this earth as we move into our 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, 100s, however far it is we want to go, right?
Yep.
This is powerful.
Yeah, and I think that it's interesting because it feels like we're given two choices, right? We can be the like, oh, she looks so young for her age, right? And we can be always trying to chase that, or we are like crones, right? And so it's like, we move through life. And so, we're the maiden, the young girl, and then we're into our mother phase. And then immediately after, we're crones. There's no like vital older woman who is just out there living her best. Well, there are lots of vital older women, but
Good.
in the stories, it's just like you just sort of morph into this, old, I don't know, forest hag or something, right? And then and then our bodies break down, and then we can't take care of ourselves, and then that's how you end things. Like that's terrible to me. That is so not reality.
Yeah, I agree. And I know you work a lot with folklore and these iconic symbols of our evolution. There are none out there for an 80, 90-year-old woman, or do we need to create some?
There's great stories. There are Like you think about the Norns who are, older women who are deciding the fates of everyone, right? And they're weaving the thread and they decide when to cut it. There is one of my favorite characters of all times, Baba Yaga, who is a witch who flies around in a mortar and pestle, and she has a house on chicken legs that walks around. And if you go to her, she may help you, she may mentor you and guide you and help you, or she might kill you, just depending on how she's feeling that day. If you do the wrong things. And she's a very morally ambiguous kind of character, which
Mhm.
is great, I think, because, we all want to believe we're good people, but then if we do something that doesn't fit that, we're like, oh my God, I'm a terrible person. It's like, no, that just is the way it is. And don't tell yourself that story again. And so, and Baba Yaga's out there flying around. She doesn't care if, people think she's a bad person for making her fence out of the bones of the people that she's killed, right?
Well, what I would say is I think I most want to be like Baba Yaga. Um, and I think a lot of women do. We begin to, at this age, we start to break the rules, the
Yes.
expectations, and say, to hell with that. Sorry, my French, but we're just done with that. We're moving on.
Yep.
We're just going to be who I am and accept who I am and love who I am. And I'll love the people who love me for who I am, not worried about the people who think I'm some kind of problem. Yeah.
Right. And I think that, that worry, again, that is a tax on our energy, right?
Hmm.
Spending those thoughts, which again are run by electrical impulses, that taps our energy and drains us. And when we stop worrying about it, it's like, hey, what am I going to use this energy for that I don't care anymore about what people are thinking,
Yeah.
even if they are, it's not
It's
my
pretty
problem.
system.
Yeah, and then you can say again, now what's my story? Because your story used to be, oh, people are gonna think X, Y, and Z about me. Now you don't have to think that anymore. And so it's like, wow, you've suddenly got this new source of power available to you that you can utilize in any way that makes you happy.
And so if we bring this back to this idea of energy,
Mhm.
how does the stories we tell ourselves, how does that fit with our energy? How does it drive our energetic levels, and shape them, or how does it work?
Well, yeah, I mean, our stories are what we sort of how we interpret what is happening to us. And I think that, again, when we were talking about eating healthy food, right? That looks different for everybody. Everybody's body is different. I was vegan for a very long time. I was a militant vegan in my 20s. And what I found as I started getting into my 30s was that I don't feel great when I'm not eating meat regularly. And I can tell, even if I like go a couple days without eating meat just because I decided I wanted different stuff, I don't feel as good. My energy levels are not as good. And so when I was telling myself, oh, for these reasons, I'm going to be vegetarian or vegan, but that didn't fit with who I am. And when I started saying, I feel my healthiest, I feel best when I do sometimes eat meat or fish, right? And I accepted that. And I'm sure there is some sort of science about the way my biology works, but I
Mhm.
know that to be true. So our stories drive our behaviors, and our behaviors affect our energy. So I guess did I answer your question?
Yeah, that's a great answer to that question. So, again, it goes back to being really aware of the stories that you're telling yourself,
Hmm.
about getting older,
Yes.
and making sure that those are the stories that you want to live out for the rest of your
Yes.
life. Yeah.
Exactly. Exactly right.
So, again, thinking about a woman like in my age group, what are some of the signs that our energy is depleted or that it's out of balance?
Well, I think that there's a lot of ways that you can pay attention to that. If you feel exhausted, if you feel anxious, if you're starting to feel emotions that don't seem to tie to anything. And when we do feel anxious, we or any emotion, right? We try to assign like a reason to it. And me personally, I have food sensitivities, right? And so if I eat certain foods, it sort of ramps my body up. And I would have insomnia and anxiety, a racy heart. And so when that would happen, and it would be the middle of the night and I'm having anxiety, I would be like, oh, what am I anxious about? And I'd be like, maybe I'm worried about money. And I'd try and find the reason and assign it. And when I realized it was a biochemical thing, I stopped looking for reasons to assign to that anxiety. And I went, oh, here's some anxiety. Okay. And so consequently, I stopped suffering over the anxiety. I just let it be. And so when you start to pay attention to different feelings, sit with it, right?
Mm.
Figure out what it is that you're feeling and what might be sort of causing it, and not try and analyze it and assign it some reason. Just try and figure out what is going on with your body. And one of the ways that you can do this is by figuring out what your sort of baseline healthy energy feels like.
Mhm.
Because when we are, in the world connecting with other people, our energy affects each other, right? And this happens on the quantum level, right? So there's a thing called quantum entanglements. And so we are on the quantum level physically connected to people that we have interactions with, and plants and animals and everything, right? And this is not new science. We've known about this for 100 years. Like Einstein was talking about this. I think he called it spooky action at a distance.
I
And
like
so,
it.
yeah. And so our energy levels are affected by the energy levels of everyone around us. And so sometimes you'll be, affected by somebody else's bad mood, right? They're angry and that
Mhm.
brings you down a little bit. So what you need to do is figure out what your energy is like when everything is fine, when you're alone, when you are just, feeling pretty good, and sort of focus in on how you feel and what that feels like, and make sure you understand your energy, because sometimes you can just get thrown off. Somebody next to you is angry while they're getting their coffee, right? And you just sort of get that little, fallout of their anger. And so when we talk about, our energy and how we sort of guard it, we have to know what it is first. So we
Mhm.
have to observe. We have to, again, practice feeling it when you're alone, when it's calm, when there are no distractions, and feel what it is you feel like. And if you stop feeling that way, then pay attention.
Because,
Because you
oh, when
want,
you stop feeling that positive way. Yeah.
right. Yeah.
Okay.
Pay attention to what's going on around you. And, are you picking up someone else's energy, or are you needing to eat? Are you eat the right thing for you in that moment? And I think that's where you can really sort of find an optimal kind of sense of energy, because you will make little adjustments to get back to that good solid energy that you have.
I think I think all of this makes a great deal of sense to me. And I know from my own experience going through my 60s, I sometimes have felt like I'm on a roller coaster.
Mhm.
And I can see where stopping for a moment and first, to me, I would ask the question, is this me or is this something else in my environment or people around me?
Yep.
And then eliminate the external first. Okay, it's
Mhm.
not them, it's not the environment, then it is me. Okay, and now I can delve deeper into myself to try to understand. And this would be what I would call orientation. Orient yourself to where you're at right now, this moment.
Right.
What am I feeling? What do I need? What do I want?
Hmm.
and then go from there. And even just thinking that through makes me calmer.
Yep.
But a lot of times it could be someone else or something else in your environment that is influencing your energetic field and ultimately how you are feeling and responding to the world around you.
Right.
So recognizing this goes on all the time and stopping for a moment and just checking in with yourself is a really great process to embrace for clarity.
Yeah, and a lot of people do what is called grounding, centering, and shielding.
Hmm.
And it's, a visualization that you do. And so the way that I do it is I imagine sort of my energy going down into the earth,
Hmm.
right? And sort of getting that like lowered vibration, connecting with that. And then I imagine, so the way that I was taught is I imagine a sort of neon red circle that starts to go around my body, right?
Okay.
And that represents like activities going forward, right? And then there's a yellow one that goes sort of around my body to the side, right? And then there is like a neon blue that sort of comes out of my torso and goes around me, and that represents time. And so what I do is I get those three spinning and I keep them spinning in my mind, right? And all at once. And where they sort of connect in the middle, I imagine a white ball of light. And so I sort of, as I breathe in, it grows bigger and bigger, right? And then I imagine that energy is coming in from the top of my head. And so that it grows bigger and bigger. And I just imagine that is, my energetic sense,
Mhm.
right? And I work that way to increase it. So I'm connected and keeping my vibration at a good level, but raising my energy through that like really quick. And it takes me 2 minutes. And then I imagine a dome around me. The particular one I imagine is like sort of an iridescent, kind of silvery kind of look. And I think of that not as a shield, because we call it shielding, but I think of it as a filter. And I imagine not letting negative energy filter in to me. And so that is kind of the visualization that I do to get myself in the mindset of pay attention to the energy around me and make sure I'm not taking on energy that I don't need. And I spent a very long time doing an exercise for myself where I would write down how I felt after every single interaction I had with a person in any way. And I found that some people made me feel bad all the time. And with those people, I just got them out of my life. I just faded
Mhm.
away and said, no, that's not. But some people made me feel good, like really good sometimes, and not great other times. And what
Mhm.
I figured out from that is when they made me feel not great, fights withstanding, because people have disagreements, but when they made me feel not great, almost all of the time it was a story I was telling myself. I'd send somebody a text. I wouldn't get a text back. I'd be like, did I make them mad? What's going on? Are they upset with me? And it was like, no, they're busy. But I would start to tell those stories, and that would again tap my energy, and it would be taxing for me. So yeah, just pay attention and practice what it is to feel your own energy, to protect your own energy, because we can. We don't, there are ways to break quantum entanglements that are fairly easy. But yeah, so just learn who you are when you're at a good baseline and remember to check in with yourself.
Mhm. And then when you're interacting with other people, pay attention to who drains you and who gives you energy. And I would assume who is neutral,
Yeah,
right? And
absolutely.
then you want to stick with the neutral or the giving the energy versus the drainers.
Yeah,
Let the drainers go, unless you're actually making up a story in your head, and that's why they're draining you, like you had given that example.
yeah,
Um, and so really, bottom line is it comes down to awareness,
yes,
knowing your own state of health and well-being, and
Yep.
then being attentive when you go out of it, either upper or lower, but you're
Hmm.
paying attention and then noticing what might be driving that, what might be influencing shifts and changes in your energetic level that you might want to keep encouraging or you might want to discourage in your life.
Exactly. And, I don't also, we're talking about this optimal level of vibration. There are times when it's right and good for you to have a lower vibration when you're going to bed, you know?
Mhm.
Like you don't want to be as amped up as you are in the middle of the day. So there it's not like a good and bad thing. It's just you know, how do you want to feel and how can you get yourself to that right level?
It's more about observing and noticing and less about judging.
Exactly.
This is what it is now. Do we want to change that
Hmm.
for whatever reason, given the situation at hand?
Right. Right.
Okay. So, for my last question, what I would love to ask you is what is what is one small shift that a woman could make this week as she is listening to this or as she moves forward throughout the next few days to reconnect with her own energy and her own power? What would you advise to her?
I would say find some time alone
Mhm.
and observe yourself, right? And observe how you are in different environments, right? How are you inside as opposed to out in the yard or going off to the woods, the forest preserve, right? How are you as you move about the world? And just look into yourself and see how you're feeling all the time. And if you're like, I'm not happy with my energy and how I'm feeling, then look at your stories and
Mhm.
see what stories you can tell that will shift to make you sort of behave in ways that will increase that energy and increase your vibration.
And you may not think you're telling a story,
Right.
but you are. And
Exactly.
so
And
even a friend or a guide like someone like you or a coach, someone would be able to give you at least some insight on that if you don't think you are, but we tell stories all the time.
we do. It's constant within us. And
Yeah.
when you understand that and you look for it, and a lot of these stories we learned when we were growing up,
Mhm.
and we carry them with us because, like I said earlier, we forget that there was ever a story. We forget someone told us we're shy, or someone told us that we are, whatever it is that we believe about ourselves. And I don't think that our personalities are as set in stone as people think they are, because I personally, when I was in high school, I changed my personality because I did not have the personality that I knew that I needed to do an activity that I wanted to do. I wanted to stage manage, and I was very shy. Everyone had always told me I was shy, and you can't be shy. And so I just said, well, I can't be that anymore. And so I just changed.
Yeah, and I would argue you probably never were shy. It was just other people telling that story, right?
Yeah, I think it was that I really liked to read, so I was quiet a lot.
And again, the stories are amazing to me. We think they're just we interpret them as truth when in
Exactly.
fact they really are stories. There is truth in this world, but it's not as much truth as you think. A lot of it is story. Yeah.
Exactly. Yep.
So listen to the stories you tell and challenge and question them and see if there might be better stories or different kinds of stories. I always laugh because when I was growing up, my mother always said to me, I was born under a lucky star.
Mm.
And good things always happened to me. And I thought, what a wonderful story. And so when I had two daughters, I told them the exact same thing. Said, we all were born under a lucky star, and we expect good things to happen to us because of that, you know? And so that story has served me well. But
Well, and what happens when you tell that kind of story and you believe it and you look for the evidence of it. And
exactly.
And so if you're telling yourself I'm unlucky, you look for the evidence of that. And so, I would submit to people that look for the evidence of things that work in your favor, give you what you want. Tell the stories that will support what is going to bring you to your highest good.
Absolutely. I think that is fabulous. Absolutely fabulous advice. Thank you for sharing that. We're going to go ahead and wrap up today. And Tracy, I just want to start by saying thank you so much for this conversation. There is something about the way you speak about energy that makes it feel both something that's accessible, so that I can think about and work on, and that it's real. And it's not outside me per se, but it really is a part of who I am. And so
Right.
it's a choice I make around how I want my energy to be. So thank you for being here and for sharing this perspective with all of us. Very grateful.
Thank you very much for having me on. I really appreciated this conversation. It was a lot of fun.
Absolutely. And if those of you who are listening or watching, if you would like to learn more about Tracy and her work, you will find links in the show notes that you can connect with her through. I would encourage you to take a moment to explore what she offers and reach out to her if this conversation resonated with you. And to those of you listening and watching, thank you for being here. You are the ones that make our show possible. I don't take your time or your attention lightly, and I am really glad that you choose to spend it here with us. So, again, thank you. You If you feel this episode spoke to you or gave you a new way to understand your own energy, I'd love to hear from you. Please leave a comment, share your takeaway with me, however you want to communicate that, or even pass this episode along to someone else, another woman who might need to hear this message and might find value in it. If you haven't already, please be sure to subscribe to our show so that you don't miss the upcoming episodes that we have planned for you. Again, this month of April, we'll be focusing in on the whole concept of integration. And finally, if you are finding yourself in a place where something is shifting, where you are noticing your energy differently and you would like to have a conversation around how to learn more about that, please consider booking a Finding Your Inner Bearings call with me. The links are available in the show notes as well, and we can chat a little bit about you and where you're at in this process. And so until next time, please do as Tracy suggested, take a moment to listen to your energy, see what it is telling you. It just may be guiding you somewhere important. Thank you ever so much. Enjoy.